It was an ordinary evening at one of the most luxurious restaurants in the city. The lighting was soft and warm, casting an inviting glow over the polished tables where the city's elite dined in style. The restaurant, known for its exquisite cuisine and high-end clientele, was a place where people went to feel special, pampered, and important. The waitstaff moved gracefully between tables, dressed in sharp uniforms, ensuring each guest felt like royalty. It was a place where every detail was meticulously planned, the kind of place where you wouldn't expect anything out of the ordinary to happen. But on this particular night, something was about to happen that would flip the script entirely. A man walked in, casually dressed in a simple black jacket and jeans. His presence was calm and unassuming, yet there was something oddly familiar about him, though no one could quite place it. His name was Keanu Reeves, a name known all around the world for his roles in action-packed blockbusters like Asterisk, The Matrix Asterisk, and Asterisk John Wick Asterisk. But tonight, he wasn't the star of a movie or a character on a screen. He was just a man walking into his own restaurant, completely unaware that his appearance was about to spark a chain of events that no one would see coming. As Keanu took his seat at a quiet corner table, the restaurant buzzed with the usual chatter and clinking of glasses. The atmosphere was elegant, but there was a sense of quiet energy in the air, like everyone was holding their breath, waiting for something unexpected to happen. The evening was going smoothly until a young waiter, new to the establishment, approached Keanu's table. The waiter, a young man named Tom, had been working at the restaurant for just a few weeks. He was still getting used to the high-pressure environment, trying his best to learn the ropes, keep the customers happy, and do his job as flawlessly as possible. However, Tom had a bit of a chip on his shoulder. He wanted to make a name for himself, to show that he was better than just being a mere waiter. He believed he could handle anything thrown at him, and that night, he felt like he was finally going to prove it. Little did he know, this would be a test he wasn't prepared for. Tom approached Keanu's table with a confident stride, ready to take his order. As he looked at the man sitting before him, however, he couldn't shake the feeling that there was something familiar about him. But Keanu, ever humble and down to earth, wasn't flaunting his fame or wealth. He simply greeted Tom with a polite smile, as if he were any other guest. Tom, on the other hand, was less than impressed. He had seen Keanu's movies but didn't exactly consider him a huge star. In fact, he'd always felt that the celebrity culture was overrated. What's the big deal about this guy? Tom thought. Just another actor, no different than anyone else. It was a thought that was shared by many young people who saw celebrities as distant figures, unable to grasp the full extent of their influence. "Good evening," Tom said, his tone neutral but professional. "What can I get for you tonight?" Keanu glanced up and smiled, speaking in his usual calm and collected manner. "I'll have the special, thank you." The waiter nodded but seemed distracted. He couldn't help but notice Keanu's plain attire, almost as if the man had no real interest in flaunting his success. Tom decided, in that moment, to make a small joke. Something harmless, or so he thought. "You know, the special's really only for the true VIPs around here," he said, smirking slightly. Keanu raised an eyebrow, sensing something off in Tom's tone. "I suppose I qualify as a VIP," Keanu replied, still calm, his voice laced with a touch of amusement. Tom, however, didn't pick up on the subtle shift in atmosphere. "Sure," he replied, now chuckling under his breath. "Or maybe just another regular guest who thinks they can get special treatment." It was a joke that could have easily passed unnoticed. But Keanu, always the one to stay composed, didn't take offense. He simply smiled, nodding and saying, "I'll leave that up to you." Tom was momentarily thrown off by the response. He expected more of a reaction, maybe a laugh or even a little irritation. But Keanu remained so composed, so unaffected by his snide comment. Tom, now feeling like he'd taken a small jab at a celebrity and gotten away with it, walked away without giving it much more thought. However, what Tom didn't realize, what no one around him knew, was that Keanu wasn't just a guest at the restaurant. He was the owner. This restaurant, this sanctuary of luxury, was his creation. He had put every detail into it, from the elegant decor to the carefully curated menu. And he was here tonight, as a silent observer, seeing how the staff interacted with the guests. But most of all, he was watching Tom. The next few minutes were tense for Keanu, but not in the way one would expect. He wasn't offended by Tom's comment. He'd heard worse in his life. What bothered him was the arrogance, the assumption that he could get away with disrespecting someone simply because of their status. And what bothered him even more was that this wasn't the first time he'd seen this type of behavior from the young waiter. In fact, Keanu had been hearing murmurs from the staff about Tom's attitude for a while. There were whispers about his cockiness, how he thought he could cut corners and treat the high-profile guests however he wanted, all because of his own inflated sense of importance. Keanu had to wonder if Tom's bravado would eventually lead to trouble. But tonight, he decided to let it play out. Meanwhile, Tom was already moving on to his next table, unaware of the storm he had just sparked. He felt good about the interaction. After all, Keanu had taken his jab without responding harshly. For a moment, it even gave him a sense of superiority, as if he had outsmarted the famous actor. Little did he know, this was only the beginning. As the evening wore on, Keanu remained in his corner, watching, waiting. He wasn't angry, far from it. But the game was about to change. Tom was about to learn a valuable lesson, and Keanu wasn't going to let this pass by. But the real question was, would Tom even realize the mistake he made before it was too late? And that's where we leave off, with Tom blissfully unaware of who he had just insulted, and Keanu Reeves silently watching the young waiter's every move. What would happen next? Would Tom realize the weight of his words, or would the unexpected reveal shatter everything he knew? Stay tuned to find out. As the night continued, Tom's confidence seemed to grow with each passing moment. He walked from table to table, barely giving a second thought to the earlier exchange. After all, he was doing his job, and things were running smoothly. The restaurant was full, and the guests seemed pleased. But there was something lingering in the air, a tension that no one could quite place. It wasn't just the buzz of a busy night. There was something more subtle at play, something Tom couldn't feel yet, but would soon come to regret. Keanu sat quietly, observing the dynamic between Tom and the other staff. He had been in this business long enough to know how people acted when they thought no one was watching. The restaurant was more than just a luxury dining experience to him. It was a place where he wanted people to feel welcome, treated with respect, and valued. He built it with care, with a vision of bringing together the highest standards of service and hospitality. But there was something missing, something he couldn't quite put his finger on until tonight. The energy of the restaurant was off, and Tom, with his smug attitude, was at the heart of it. For the young waiter, the night was just another opportunity to prove himself. Tom had always felt that life owed him something. He had grown up with little, always working to get by. The opportunity to work in such a prestigious restaurant was something he saw as a ticket to something bigger, a way to climb the social ladder and show the world that he belonged with the elite. It wasn't just about the job. It was about the recognition, the feeling of superiority that came with serving people who paid hundreds for a meal. But somewhere along the way, Tom lost sight of what truly mattered: the people, the experience, the art of hospitality. Keanu wasn't the only one who noticed Tom's attitude. The other staff members were beginning to grow tired of his behavior. While many of them had been working at the restaurant for years, they were accustomed to high standards and professionalism. They knew how to treat guests with care, no matter their background or status. But Tom's arrogance was starting to rub them the wrong way. He had a knack for cutting corners, skimming on service, and acting as if he was above it all. Whispers started circulating among the staff about how Tom had been acting, and while no one had the courage to confront him directly, It was clear that something needed to change. As the evening wore on, Keanu's thoughts began to shift. He had never been one to take unnecessary action, preferring instead to observe and let people make their own choices. But Tom's lack of respect for his guests and colleagues had crossed a line. He wasn't just disrespecting people, he was disrespecting the very essence of what Keanu had built. This wasn't just about a misplaced comment or a bad joke. This was about a deeper disregard for the values that the restaurant stood for. Keanu knew he couldn't let this slide. Not anymore. But he also knew that the situation needed to be handled carefully. The last thing he wanted was to make a scene or create an uncomfortable atmosphere for the other guests. He had to be strategic. He had to get inside Tom's head, make him understand the consequences of his actions without pushing him too far. And so Keanu decided to stay quiet for a while longer, to let the tension build, to see how Tom would handle the rest of the night. Meanwhile, Tom was oblivious to the storm brewing just beneath the surface. He continued to make his rounds, serving drinks and taking orders, barely stopping to notice the eyes that watched him. Every so often, he would glance toward Keanu's table, but he only saw the same calm expression. It was almost as if Keanu was waiting for something. Tom's arrogance started to grow, and with it, his sense of invincibility. He had no idea what kind of mess he was about to step into. Then, it happened. As the evening drew to a close, Keanu decided it was time to make his move. The dinner rush had slowed down, and most of the guests had finished their meals. It was the perfect moment for a quiet confrontation. Keanu stood up from his table and walked toward the kitchen, his eyes focused, his every step deliberate. Tom, still oblivious, was wrapping up the last few orders of the night when Keanu appeared in front of him. For a moment, the two men just stood there, locked in silence. Tom looked up, his expression unreadable. Keanu's presence, though calm, was commanding. The air between them felt thick, heavy, as if something unspoken was hanging in the balance. "You've got a lot of nerve," Keanu finally said, his voice steady but firm. Tom's initial reaction was one of confusion. "What?" he asked, his tone still cocky, but with a hint of uncertainty. "You think you can just walk around here," Keanu continued, "treating people however you want, all because you think you're better than them?" Tom's jaw tightened, but he didn't speak. Keanu's words were cutting deep, but he wasn't about to back down. "I don't know who you think you are," Keanu went on, his eyes narrowing slightly, "but I'm the one who built this place. I'm the one who made it what it is. And if you think you can disrespect the very people who keep it running, then you've got another thing coming." The words hit Tom harder than he expected. It was as if the floor beneath him shifted. He knew that tone. He knew what it meant, but still he couldn't bring himself to fully process it. Something was off, but he refused to admit it. Keanu's next words were the ones that finally struck home. "You've insulted the wrong person." It was at that moment that Tom's mind began to race. He thought back to the brief exchange earlier, the way he'd made that joke to Keanu. The way Keanu had taken it in stride, too calm, too collected. It was all coming together now. The realization hit him like a ton of bricks, but by the time he understood what was happening, it was too late to take back his words. Tom stood there frozen, as Keanu's final words echoed in the silence. "You didn't just insult an actor, Tom. You insulted the owner of this restaurant, and I don't take that lightly." The weight of the moment crashed over him. Tom didn't know how to respond. His pride, his arrogance, his entire perception of the night began to crumble in that instant. The room seemed to close in around him, and he felt small, insignificant. This wasn't just a mistake anymore. It was a turning point. And now, Tom had to face the consequences of his actions. But what would they be? Would Keanu fire him on the spot? Or was there something more dramatic, more fitting, in store for Tom's reckless behavior? The questions lingered in the air, unanswered, as Tom stood frozen, staring at Keanu. The tension was unbearable, and all Tom could do was wait for the next move. Tom stood there, paralyzed. The realization that Keanu was not just another guest, but the owner of the restaurant, hit him like a freight train. His mind was spinning, trying to find a way out, but it felt like the walls were closing in. The high-end restaurant, with its sleek design and luxurious ambience, suddenly felt like a cage, a place where he had made a serious miscalculation, one that he couldn't undo. Keanu's steady gaze never wavered. For a moment, it seemed like time had stopped. The other staff, who had been discreetly watching from the distance, were now holding their breath. No one dared to interrupt. The entire room was waiting for the next move, waiting for the resolution of the tension that had been building all night. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, Keanu broke the silence. "You know, Tom," he said, his voice still calm, "you're not the first person to underestimate me. People do it all the time. They think because they don't see me as some flashy celebrity, that I'm just another face in the crowd." He paused for a moment, his words sinking in. "But I'm more than just a face. And this place—" He looked around the restaurant, his eyes softening. "This place means something. It's built on respect, for the people, for the work, for the art of it all." Tom tried to speak, but his words failed him. He opened his mouth, but nothing came out. What could he possibly say? Could he apologize? Would that make a difference? Keanu continued, his tone shifting slightly, though still firm. "I don't want to be the kind of owner who just fires people for making mistakes. That's not who I am. But what you said earlier, it wasn't just a mistake. It was a sign of how you've been treating people around here. And that's what I can't tolerate." Tom's heart was pounding in his chest now. He realized just how much he had taken for granted, how much he had belittled others without understanding the bigger picture. He had thought he was invincible, that his position, however small, gave him a right to act however he wanted. But now, in this moment, he could see the cracks in his own arrogance. He was face to face with someone who had built something meaningful, someone who had earned his success the hard way, and he had disrespected that. Keanu took a deep breath. "So here's what's going to happen," he said, his voice softening just a little. "I'm not going to fire you, but you're going to have to do something that'll make you earn back the respect you've lost. You're going to spend the next month shadowing the people who really understand what it means to treat others well. The chefs, the servers, the staff who've been here for years. You're going to learn humility, and you're going to learn what it means to be a part of something bigger than yourself. If you're willing to do that, then you can stay. But if not, then this will be your last night here." Tom's mind raced. This wasn't what he had expected. In fact, it wasn't even close to what he had prepared for. He thought he would either be fired or kicked out with a swift, final word. But this was different. This was a challenge, an opportunity to prove he could change, to show that he could rise above the arrogance that had clouded his judgment. And yet, the weight of the task seemed daunting. How could he possibly redeem himself after all of this? The room was still, as if waiting for Tom's decision. He could feel the eyes of the staff on him, waiting to see if he would step up to the plate or crumble under the pressure. For the first time that night, he felt small, not because of Keanu, but because of the reality of what he had done and the chance he was being given to make things right. Tom took a deep breath and looked Keanu in the eyes. The anger, the arrogance, the feeling of superiority, they all faded. What was left was something he hadn't allowed himself to feel in a long time: humility. "I'll do it," he said quietly, his voice shaky but resolute. Keanu gave a small nod, his expression softening. "Good. I believe in second chances. But you've got to put in the work. And you can't fool anyone here. If you really want to make this right, you've got to show up every day ready to learn." The tension in the room finally began to dissipate. The staff, who had been holding their breath, relaxed a little. Keanu turned to walk away, but before he did, he looked over his shoulder. "One last thing, Tom. Respect is earned, not given. I hope you remember that." As Keanu left, Tom stood there for a moment, letting the weight of the words settle in. He had been given a chance, a rare, life-changing opportunity to grow and change. It wasn't going to be easy. He knew that. But this was his chance to make things right, not just for Keanu or for the restaurant, but for himself. In the weeks that followed, Tom threw himself into his work. He learned the names of every staff member, he worked alongside the chefs, and he spent hours observing the veteran waiters, learning the true art of hospitality. The more he immersed himself in the work, the more he began to understand what had been missing from his approach all along. It wasn't about status, it wasn't about power. It was about creating an experience for the people who walked through those doors, making them feel valued and respected, no matter who they were. The journey wasn't easy, and there were days when Tom wanted to give up. But with each passing day, he saw the difference he was making. Slowly, he regained the trust of his colleagues, and most importantly, he regained his own sense of purpose. He had started out thinking the world owed him something. But in the end, he learned that the world didn't owe him anything. It was up to him to show up and earn it. By the end of the month, Tom had transformed in ways he hadn't thought possible. Keanu, who had been watching from a distance, saw the changes in him. It wasn't just his work ethic that had improved. It was his attitude, his ability to connect with people, his newfound sense of humility. Keanu knew then that Tom had learned the lesson, and that he was ready to be a part of something bigger than himself. When Keanu called Tom into his office that final day, he didn't have to say much. He just smiled and nodded, as if to say, "You did it." And for the first time since walking through those restaurant doors, Tom felt like he truly belonged. Not because he had earned the respect of Keanu or the staff, but because he had finally earned his own respect. The lesson was clear. Success isn't about what you take, it's about what you give. And in the end, it wasn't just Keanu's restaurant that had been transformed. It was Tom himself.